Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Support for Brexit in Northern Ireland has fallen dramatically. That's according to new research. While 44% voted to leave the EU in the referendum, a new poll suggests that that minority has now fallen to 31% who would favour Brexit if given a second vote. Well, joining me now is John Garry, Professor of Political Behaviour at Queen's University Belfast and research leader on the UK in a Changing Europe project. Welcome to you indeed. Now, of course, Northern Ireland did vote against Brexit in the first place. So is this really remotely significant?
I think what's more significant really in pertaining to the current policy options is the fact that in the research we find a clear majority in Northern Ireland for favouring a type of UK exit. If the UK has to exit, they favour a type of UK exit that involves staying in the customs union and single market. It's quite unusual to find Protestants and Catholics agreeing with each other in Northern Ireland, and 62% of both communities favour that particular option. And that tallies with some of the other findings that came both from our attitude survey and our deliberative, one-day deliberative exercise, and that is there's a lot of concern and anxiety about borders, about either the north-south border or the east-west border. And for example, significant proportions of the population would find certain border controls impossible to accept. For example, 1 in 5 Catholics would find camera-based technology at the north-south border impossible to accept.
There are some cameras already, aren't there?
There are, but if we had a whole influx of Brexit-related cameras, which were symbolically and psychologically associated with a re-emergence of the border, that would be regarded as problematic by a significant minority.
Now, this obviously goes beyond what you're able to ask in your survey, but doesn't this actually suggest that people in Northern Ireland pretty much lining up behind where Theresa May seems to be heading? Because she, of course, has said there could be a backstop which would keep all of the UK within a lot of these customs regulations.
Well, the backstop was, originally supposed to simply apply to Northern Ireland, but if there's a reinterpretation of the backstop...
It does say UK, not Northern Ireland.
If it transpires that the backstop is UK-wide, and that essentially or effectively means that the UK will remain in the customs union and single market, then that would be consistent with our findings, both with respect to the way people answered our survey question in terms of the type of exit they want, and also with respect to the concerns relating to the borders, because that option would obviate the need for north-south or east-west
I mean,
border.
Brexiteers and the DUP, who of course were in favour of leaving the European Union, are both saying that actually what your survey shows is that support for a united Ireland leaving the UK is at very low levels at the moment.
They are right to say that the percentage saying that people would vote for a united Ireland is low, 21% overall, 42% of Catholics. What's interesting about our research is that we explored the conditionality of people's attitudes to a united Ireland. In other words, if Brexit turns out to be X, or if Brexit turns out to be Y, would you vote for a united Ireland? And these different conditions have a big effect on Catholic attitudes. So if the UK clicked its fingers and said, sorry, it was all a hoax, we're staying in the EU, 28% of Catholics would vote for a united Ireland. But if it's a hard Brexit, leaving the customs union, leaving the single market with all of the implications for borders, then 53% would vote. There's a lot of don't knows in there. Then they could go anywhere in the context of a campaign.
And just finally, does this suggest that the DUP, although they're the dominant party in Northern Ireland, are out of step?
Their support base is more in favour of the UK as a whole remaining in the customs union and single market.
Okay, that's very interesting. And just tell us about the extent of the survey, because people always quibble about these things.
About the what?
The extent of the survey.
We did 2 studies. One was a conventional attitude survey, representative sample of 1,012 people with a random selection, and the demographic traits are proportional with the latest census estimates. The deliberative forum, which was a one-day event, which is analogous to a citizens' assembly, contained 48 people, broadly representative in terms of demographics and equally distributed in terms of people who voted to remain and people who voted to leave in 2016.
Fascinating stuff. Professor John Gary, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This is All Out Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. Boris Johnson may be in South America. It hasn't stopped him continuing to have his say on the Brexit debate. He's warned Theresa May that she needs to deliver a Brexit that doesn't leave the UK aligned to the customs union after 2020. But he also urged Conservative Brexiteers to give the Prime Minister time and space to get on with the job. So the question is, can the customs union problem, which of course relates to the Irish border and splits the cabinet, actually be fixed? Well, joining me to talk about that are Gareth Thomas, the Labour MP and Open Britain supporter, and Daniel Koswinski, who is the Conservative MP and Leave supporter. Welcome to you both.
Thanks so much.
Do you think we are moving towards a solution on this customs union problem?
I hope so. As I understand it, we've got to by the end of June, when there's a big EU summit, when it's sort of make or break for Theresa May. But the sort of divisions in the cabinet over this don't really give us a great deal of confidence one way or another. And business groups, I think, are very worried as to what is going to happen.
What do you think the solution should be?
Personally, I think we should stay in the customs union. That's the position of my party. I think it's...
well, your party's a customs union, isn't it? Not the customs union.
Well, my personal position is that we should stay in the customs union, and I hope that we'll get to that with the Labour Party more generally. I think that's where the Society of Motor Manufacturers are, that's where most business groups are. Those who look at Northern Ireland and the border issues with the Republic recognise that staying in the customs union is, without question, the best for maintaining peace in Northern Ireland.
Is that acceptable to you?
No, not at all. And what we have to remember is that we're not just negotiating for ourselves, we're negotiating for the rest of the continent of Europe, because there will be further divisions within the EU, whether it's countries being forced to adopt the euro against their wishes, or whether it's indeed certain countries wishing to assess leaving the European Union themselves. Now, up until now...
It hasn't got a lot to do with the customs union and trading.
Well, it does. It has everything to do with it, because every time a sovereign nation state has attempted to take on the European Union, whether it's the referendum in Denmark, Ireland or France, the European Union has said, no, you must comply with what we want. No country has successfully taken on the European Union and lived to tell the tale. And if we can do it, it will give succour and support to other countries.
At this stage, we're just talking about negotiating a Brexit. We're not talking about taking on the European Union.
Well, it's a game of Russian roulette.
Well, no, but so what to you is acceptable in terms of a customs settlement as part of Brexit?
Well, my constituents in Shrewsbury and the majority of the people of Britain voted to leave the European Union, which means taking back control, it means being a sovereign nation state, and it means organising a trading agreement with the European Union. But no customs union which binds our hands and diminishes our sovereignty. That is not what the people of this country voted for.
So does it bind our hands and diminish our sovereignty?
It binds our hands a little bit, but that's the price you pay for having a frictionless border, for not having huge queues of lorries stacked back in Kent from the ports of Dover and Folkestone. It's surely an acceptable price to pay for businesses to be able to trade easily with the rest of Europe, and surely it's an acceptable price to pay for continuing peace in Northern Ireland.
I mean, there is an argument in the fallback arrangement that would A, not last forever, but B, would allow Britain to pursue independent trade deals while having the advantages of free-flowing trade.
Well, look, I'm a member of the European Research Group, which Jacob Rees-Mogg chairs very, very well, and we are adamant and we are waiting, as has been said, what the Prime Minister comes up with. But we would find it extremely difficult to justify to our constituents voting for anything which gave the impression that the Brexit that people were getting was a neutered down Brexit or a watered down Brexit.
But surely this is ideology, not practicality. I mean, if Britain can continue to have free trade with the European Union and go out and seek new trade deals with the rest of the world. What is wrong with that?
Well, ideology is very important in politics, and it's also very important in politics because there is such a disconnect, massive disconnect. I think we can both agree there's a huge disconnect between the British people and the political elites in this country.
But
and if we do not do what the British people have instructed us to do, whether they are right or wrong, they've instructed us to pull out.
All they've done is they voted to leave. They haven't voted on the details.
Yes,
and that's what you guys are supposed to work out.
Voting to leave, I'm sorry, but I fundamentally believe that voting to leave the European Union means leaving their clutches and leaving
Daniel,
the customs union.
But Daniel, with respect, you've got to answer the key questions about the customs union. I mean, neither of the two options that Theresa May has put to the cabinet, our allies in Europe, neither of them are acceptable to them. The Swedish foreign minister, Sweden's a close ally of ours. The Irish, who are close allies of ours, both say that both options that Theresa May's cabinet are looking at, neither are acceptable to them.
But do you think Brexit should be held to ransom over the Irish border?
Well, I don't think it's a case of holding it to ransom. I voted to trigger Article 50 to respect the will of the British people. Now we're into the discussions about what's going to actually work in practice. And I think increasingly people are becoming clear that pulling out of the customs union isn't going to work. We've spent a lot of time in Parliament, the government have spent a lot of time looking for alternatives to the customs union, the work for Northern Ireland and the work for businesses, and we haven't come up with anything so far.
Talking in the Sunday Times yesterday that if it comes to it and Britain, Theresa May proposes something that would maintain the customs union, that you and the European research group you belong to would actually seek to bring her down, is that right?
Well, that's a hypothetical question, and of course we haven't reached that. But clearly, the Prime Minister, I know, in all the discussions she's had with us, is very conscious of how difficult it will be for a large section of the Conservative Parliamentary Party to support something which we believe is not Brexit.
So the message is do as we say or we'll do you in?
Well, the message is do what you yourself have said in the Lancaster House speech and in all the other major announcements she's made on this. If she follows through with what she's promised, there will be no problem.
And this is the problem, Adam, that the British government is being held to ransom by a small hard core of ideologues,
Democrats,
who, despite us spending huge amounts of time on this, haven't found an alternative to staying in the customs union.
But there are those supporters of Jeremy Corbyn who would say that he is being held to ransom, that people like you are trying to push him towards embracing the customs union, which he clearly doesn't want to do.
Well, Jeremy has shifted our position over the last 12 months to be in favour of a customs union. I think as it becomes increasingly clear that alternatives to the customs union are not in practice going to work, that we will be able to persuade them for staying in.
Let's suppose, I know it's hypothetical, but let's suppose the European Research Group decide to try and bring down the Prime Minister. If it comes to a vote in Parliament, do you vote for what you regard as a sensible Brexit deal, or do you vote with them to destroy the government?
Well, I will definitely want a change of government because we need to crack on with sensible negotiations with Europe. There's no question about that, to give business certainty. So I think we need a change of government, of course, but then I'd want us to be able to crack on with negotiating a sensible Brexit deal.
OK, well, lots of unanswered questions. Thank you both very much indeed. Britain must be ready to counter the threats to everyday life which are emerging in space. That's according to Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson, who today is announcing the launch of the UK's first defence space strategy. Well, I'm joined now by the former Science Minister, Lord Willett. What's all this about? Star Wars?
Well, certainly space is the high ground, as the military strategists would put it, the high ground that the big powers want to occupy so they can observe areas where there's conflict. And if you look at all the major powers, China, America, India, they're all in a race to have high quality access to space.
Do we actually know, I mean, who rules space? Is there an agreement on someone not claiming, I claim the stratosphere?
Yeah, there is an outer space treaty which goes back to 1967, signed between the USA and the Soviet Union, and I have to say with the UK also playing a prominent role. And that declares, amongst other things, that space should not be militarised. The fact is, however, that doesn't mean that you can't use it, for example, for putting up observation satellites to see what's going on, and also you can use it for military communication.
I mean, satellites presumably control drones, don't they, which are certainly used for military purposes.
They can do that, and in fact, but satellites have so many purposes. I mean, one of my frustrations over the years is people who think that satellites are some kind of special luxury good. I can remember talking to the Indian education minister, who said when he provided grants to the Indian states to build schools, the only way he could check whether or not they'd actually built the school was he asked for the coordinates of the location of the new school and then got a satellite photograph to see if or not there was a school building on that site. So people use satellites for lots of purposes, monitoring crops, knowing whether there's drought affecting the growth of crops. So they have a range of uses, but certainly military amongst them.
So what do you think of this announcement today from the Defence Secretary? Do you think he knows what he's talking about?
I think it is, to be honest, it's overdue. And I think what it tells us as well is a subtle change in the special relationship, in that for a long time, basically, we turned to the US to provide that type of space-based service for us. And there's a recognition, first of all, that we can't always absolutely rely on that. And secondly, if we want them to carry on providing us with data and information, maybe we should develop our own capability so we can also provide some stuff to them.
And this, of course, ties in with the story in the Financial Times today saying that obviously the GPS system is American, the Galileo is European Union.
Yep.
So we're going to have to do it ourselves, perhaps with the Australians and Canadians or something.
Yes, I still think overall it would be best if we could stay active members of Galileo, but if that fails, then clearly the fallback is for us to develop our own system. And I should declare an interest. I'm on the board of Surrey Satellites, which makes the payload for Galileo and would be a very strong contender to help build a UK satellite system. We are leaders in small satellites. But in the UK interest overall, the most economical way forward would be to stay part of Galileo. But if we can't do that, we should be able to have our own system.
Lord Willits, thank you very much indeed for joining us.